Thanks, Anarita. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jenny Cross as a professor of sociology and director of the Institute for Research in the Social Sciences at Colorado State University, has been the director of the Science Core for the Colorado Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute since 2018. Been on the forefront of creating training, interventions, and assessments for disciplinary, transdisciplinary science teams. Now, we might be asking, because it was new to me when I first came across this, that how did we come about with a science for team science? She'll explain that very well. We invited her to talk with the Board on Agriculture and Natural Resources back in the spring in conjunction with a consensus study we have done by request of the government on enhancing collaboration and cooperation amongst land-grant universities. And it's very timely. It wasn't by coincidence. The administration asked for it in light of the USDA 2022 to 2026 strategic plan and the 2023 Farm Bill to look at ways land-grant universities could adapt, become more cooperative, more collaborative across the country in support of large-scale complex problems and their research application and education. And I don't need to talk to you all about what some of those large complex problems are. So I was very impressed with her presentation and information about teams working on complex problems. And so she is going to talk with us about that today. Again, as questions come up, please put them in the chat. And there are one or two times in here where you're so free to ask some questions. So Dr. Cross, thank you very much. It's all yours.
Thanks so much, John. I'm really delighted to be here with you all today and hope we have some good, interesting questions. As John said, the field, science of team science, is kind of a growing field, and it started over 15 years ago. And the reason really is that we know that there's scientists who study teams and effective teams. And the question was, are scientific teams different? And what do we need to learn about and understand about them in order to help those large transdisciplinary complex teams to be more effective? So the field has really been growing since then. And in recent years, this very large book, Strategies for Team Science Success, got published in 2019, which really provides people some kind of pointers and strategies. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing at Colorado State University to help build and understand teams. And I'm going to share some stories from our own, what we've kind of found from studying teams, and leave a little space for you all to ask questions throughout the presentation. At CSU, the Vice President for Research started a funding initiative, and many universities are doing this. They're providing seed funding anywhere from $5,000 to $200,000 for teams. When we started funding teams at $200,000, we realized that it actually took a year or so for teams to really get up and running. So then we added an evaluation and assessment tool called the Teaming Readiness Assessment. And then we also built training programs as well as intervention and coaching. So that's what we've been up to, and we're doing this with a whole variety of teams. The process that we use is called developmental evaluation. If you've ever participated in program evaluation, you might be familiar with formative evaluation, which is understanding the processes, or outcome evaluation, which is understanding outcomes. When I've studied integrative teams for a long time, and one of the things that we know is that it takes a long time for teams to form and to develop. Building trust are all things that we need to kind of study as they're growing and developing in order to understand them, especially when universities are investing in teams. We actually want to gain knowledge about how well the teams are doing as early as possible so that we can intervene and help them. So developmental evaluation is a mix of both process evaluation, how are things going, and outcomes. What are they going to produce through this, with the intention of putting feedback into the system earlier and faster in order to speed up the development of that team and to help redirect teams as soon as they start facing really serious challenges. All of these interventions and the work that we do are based in scientific disciplines. So Sam Kainer is a communications specialist, and he has written a book on deliberative decision-making. He talks about the important process that teams need to go through in order to come up with new ideas or innovation. They have to go through this process of divergent thinking, where we bring new ideas into the team, a kind of grown zone where we're playing around with those ideas and figuring out which ones are wacky and undoable, and which ones are wacky but actually inspire us towards something that's really possible. And then convergent thinking. So the fields of creativity studies and communication studies have really looked at how large, complex, integrated teams can be creative together. Other interventions are built from the work that people in the humanities have done. The recently published book, The Toolbox Dialogue Initiative, really talks about more philosophical conversations that we have with teams, and how when you bring really diverse groups together, having these kind of philosophical conversations can help teams coalesce and understand each other and build trust to become more effective. So these are two examples of when we talk about team interventions, what do we mean? Recently, an article was published in the Journal of Clinical and Translational Sciences that looks at what are the individual competencies, what are the basic skills that individuals need, and also what are the skills that teams need. And you can see from this diagram, there are 5 big domains: team communication, collaborative problem solving, managing research, team leadership, and encouraging teams to build social bonds with each other. Those competencies are all kind of crossing over and intersecting with each other, but all of them are established in the scientific literature about things that improve the functionality of both small groups and large integrated teams. One of the other things that we do is focus on facilitation. Here is an international team that came together this summer that are working on urban sustainability issues and trying to connect co-design in 3 different cities with each other, as well as working on big data science that actually helps to improve and assess their work. So facilitating teams is another one of the skills and tools that we bring into this space. And as I mentioned previously, team assessments are a big portion of what we do. This is data from a team, and we look at how much teams actually have agreement on these various items. So what we're looking for is those red and pink bars to kind of move across the spectrum and become dominant. So any team that has people that strongly disagree with, I'm excited, I like being on this team, I trust the team, I have clear roles. We want all of those blue things to hopefully go away, but it's pretty common that we see the whole spectrum in the early development of teams. But the longer teams work together, the more pink and red we see, and the blue should be disappearing from the output, the assessments that we see here. One of the other things that we do is social network analysis, that we track the progress of teams, their growth, their connection and connectivity over time. And network analysis can be very simply descriptive, but it also can be something that we do interesting statistical analyses on. This diagram shows one team funded by the Vice President for Research at CSU. And when teams start, it's pretty common that what we see is an average degree. That's the average number of ties that you have, is about 2. And as teams begin to work together, we see that average degree move up to 6. Sometimes it gets even higher to 8 or 12, but that's only for certain kinds of ties and certain types of relationships. Now, this just shows kind of the basic growth of a team, but there are other specific to network analysis metrics that we might look at, such as reciprocity. How much do members of the team report that they are each learning from each other? And that's an important measure of integration that we can look at across disciplines, across genders, across career stage. And so these networks tell us something different than you can get from a standard social survey. People ask us all the time, who do we work with? Who have we worked with? So here's just a kind of snapshot of some of the institutional partners, as well as some of the funded institutes that are supported by either NIH or by NSF or the international team that's funded in the UK. So I want to give you all just a minute to just ask a couple of questions. So that's an overview about what we're doing in the team science space. What, if any, questions do you have at this point about the variety of team science activities to support teams? Lenore.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, sort of what's the most critical and essential things that that people can be doing, as you sort of set up teams. So sort of like, how do you set teams up for success? We have, within Ag Bio Data, we have our sort of a large team, but then we also have like little sort of subgroups. So I don't know, I'm just sort of wondering if there's some kind of like, magic ingredient that we should always add.
Yeah, the magic ingredient is time. And that time is actually really specifically focused. So time to spend on teaming and building relationships. And then it's also time in planning, time in really thinking about things that we call collaboration plans. And that book that you saw in the first slide, Strategies for Team Science Success, has a really good chapter on collaboration plans. So this is the kind of thing scientists always kind of want to rush to action and don't want to spend quite enough time in the kind of planning and team building stage. Tanya asked, what are the kinds of relationships represented by the edges in the social network graph? In the network graph that I just showed you, those are collaboration ties, but that's a great question, Tanya. We actually ask 3 really important types of ties. So one type of tie are your scientific productivity ties. Have you written articles together? Have you written grants together? So that's the kind of stuff that's related to the outcomes that we care about. But then there are 2 other kinds of ties that really matter. There are what sociologists call expressive ties, and those are social support. Who do you get advice from? Who do you hang out with? Who do you socialize with? And then there are also ties that we call instrumental ties. And instrumental ties are who helps you. So advice might also fall in this category. We all sometimes need professional advice, but sometimes we really need technical advice on how to get something done. And so those are really interesting networks. So we have found in our own science that both the expressive ties and the instrumental ties are what predict how productive teams are in their scientific ties. So that set of 3, social support, kind of technical assistance, are the things that predict how productive teams can be. Thanks for the questions, everyone. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what have we found. So what has our research shown us as we work with these teams? The first one is this graph that related to the question that Lenore asked, what do teams need to do? We just really found that teams sometimes struggle because they don't give enough time to really focusing on team development. And so we started tracking the stages that people go through. This comes from a chapter that we wrote in the recent textbook on food systems networks. The editors on that, Dawn Tilmany from CSU is one of the editors on that book. So we find that teams go through 3 phases. The first one is team emergence, where people express an idea and they get excited about that idea, they express their commitment, and they start building initial trust. So this is what people are doing when they're working on grant proposals and thinking about stuff. Then once they actually are able to start working on a project together, teams need to spend time on these things. They need to really get to know each other's expertise. So the bigger your team is and the more diverse it is, the longer step 3 takes. They need to work on crafting a shared vision. And this notably is not just communicating the PI's vision. This is actually a group effort of cultivating and creating a collective idea about what the vision of the group is and where it could go, and then building shared language. The Toolbox Dialogue Initiative that I showed you the picture of their book from, this group is very good of their activities, really focusing on that. The more diverse your team is, the more time you need to actually spend thinking about shared language, because there are all kinds of terms that we use as scientists very specifically that have completely different meanings in different spaces. For example, I'm a sociologist and I do a lot of qualitative research. And when we use the word coding, we are talking about looking at the things that people say or the things that are written in documents and thinking about what do they mean? What's the underlying idea or concept that's in that? But all of you data science nerds, when I say coding, you think of something entirely different. And so we're not meaning to miscommunicate with each other, and we're not meaning to have to code switch, but we do actually have to think, oh, who is talking about coding and what do they mean there? So teams need to spend time on that. And I've worked with some teams to build a shared glossary so that we can work on speeding that up. So these are all the things that you need to do to coalesce in order to be able to really be an effective team. Until you do those, you're not really able to get clarity of roles and responsibilities and to gain deeper knowledge and insight about what people's skills are that they're bringing to the project. And some of those are their specialized scientific skills, but other ones are just their personal skills. I'm a very visual thinker, and my team always relies on me to create nice PowerPoint decks, because not everybody thinks in a kind of visual form. So teams need time to move up this ladder. And if you get too antsy, you try to skip these steps, but that doesn't help you and it will walk your team backwards. So I like to say, go slow to go fast. We also have found that teams follow some pretty predictable patterns. So these are the scores from some different teams, but I want to show you the kind of patterning here in the teaming readiness score. So here's a team in its earliest stages where we see about 50% of their team is agreed or strongly agreed that they're excited, they like being on the team, and they think they have a unique contribution. But then they're kind of neutral or disagree on everything else. So this is a really early stage team. Then when teams start working together longer, you'll see really strong agreement. So this team, the second team in the middle, has like over 80% agreement with our team has a clear vision, I trust the team, and it's a supportive team. So this is, when I look at this data, I can tell you that this has a team that has been together for at least a year and working together for quite a while. Then the last one on the right, we see this team, all of their top ones have turned completely pink and red, which is what we love to see. But this team is still struggling a little bit. We say that they say they have clear roles, but not 100% agreement on my expertise is important or all contribute. And so this tells me that the leadership is kind of missing the boat somewhere related to recognition or figuring out how to properly include people in meetings. And so the kind of coaching that we would do with this team is around that, to try to uncover what is leading some people to really not feel that their expertise is important all the time. Either they're being underutilized for their skills or they're not being properly recognized. Here's an example from that data, but now here we're showing you comparative data across 5 teams. So notice here, team 4 has 100% agreement or strong agreement on all 6 or 7 of these items on this survey. And team 1 looks really different. You can see that teams 2 through 5 are all in pretty strong agreement. They're all like above that 80% threshold. So their graph would be mostly pink and red. And so this tells me that we've got 4 really healthy teams here that have coalesced, have a shared vision, are working together and feel connected. What is going on with team 1? Well, here they are in a network image, and the eyes here are people that you seek advice from. And we can see that team one is hardly even a network. They have almost as many isolates, people not connected, as people that they do have connected. Now, I can tell you that the struggle that this team is having is a very controlling PI who wants it to be his way and does not think that we should be wasting time in meetings with this social bonding and connecting. I have a brilliant idea, and you all just need to get on board. These other teams are really diverse. The colors in these diagrams show the colleges that people are participating from. So you can see that we did colleges instead of departments so that you can't actually, identify exactly who's who in the diagrams. So this one is just struggling. And we see this pretty commonly in scientific teams when we have really hierarchical leaders. We often see much lower team performance. This is that same one that you saw before, and this is a team that we saw really steady development on, that if I showed you these ties as their learning ties or as their collaboration ties or their advice ties, these graphs look all very similar and consistent from time to time. So this is a team who we learned so much from. We asked them, how's your team doing? And these 8 PIs are super busy. They're all kind of overcommitted. And one of them said, I love this team. We meet for 75 minutes every week. It crosses over the academic hour. Some of us can only come at the beginning. Some of us can only come at the end. But if we can come for the whole thing, we do. I make room in my schedule every week for this team meeting because I know that when I come, I'm going to feel rejuvenated and inspired and supported. And so it's worth it for me to be there, even if I only get to be there for 20 minutes. So this is a team that really spoke to us about how those expressive ties were a really important part of them accomplishing their science. As we've looked at teams and we're trying to figure out what's going on with that team that was not super high performing, team one, we saw a couple patterns. We saw some teams that progress over time. This team, these are their collaboration ties. So Tanya had asked, what are the ties? So these ties are scientific collaboration. So people have written articles or grants or worked on data collection together. So those 3 items. So you can see this team started as one that had not worked together very much before. And they were really struggling for the whole first year until they lost a very hierarchical leader. And then a young woman took charge of this network. And you can see that with new leadership, this team became much more collaborative and also much more highly productive. So we can see that a shift in leadership can really help a team. We have also found that a shift in leadership can really hurt a team. Now, some of you are guilty of this, so I'm not singling you out. This is not any of you in this diagram. However, this is a team that was pretty new together. This time we've colored it by gender, so you can just see the gender dynamics in the teams. And this team was doing pretty good, kind of coalescing around a shared vision and an idea. People were really expressing excitement. And then I got their 2017 data at the end of their 2 years of funding, and their mentoring ties looked like this. And I thought, what happened? I thought this team was doing so great. So then I went and interviewed a couple people, and they said, yeah, our PI, he went on sabbatical and no one was really in charge for a year. So we kind of fell apart. Way too many scientists just step out of their teams without good succession planning or figuring out who can take the lead when there's been a really good charismatic leader that started a project. So leadership change always affects teams, and it can go either way. But what we find is that collaborative leaders always improve teams, and the loss of collaborative leaders hurts teams. In 2019, some people from the medical sciences field published this fantastic article called The Characteristics of a Translational Scientist. And this is one of the things that we're seeing, especially in complex and really diverse teams. We see scientists doing a lot of different kinds of things. Now, we're training all of our PhD students to fill these 2 boxes I have highlighted here, to be rigorous researchers and to be domain experts. Now, we still need PhDs to do those 2 things, but we're finding that scientists also need to do other things. We need scientists to be system thinkers, skilled communicators, process innovators, team players, and boundary crossers. And we often see that different types of people, some people want to just be a scientist, kind of doing the two classic things, being a rigorous researcher and bringing domain expertise or methods expertise. But other people actually really thrive when given the opportunity to be boundary crossers. So when you think about your teams, we want you to recognize that people can and do play these different roles. Here's a team. This is also in that same chapter that I cited earlier that I wrote with Becca Jablonski and Megan Shapansky. And this is their food systems team. In the middle, we have coded these people. The colors match that chart that we saw just a minute ago of the different types of boundary crossers. And in the middle here, we have 5 scientists who cross the spectrum from postdocs to full professors. So we have 4 different career stages represented by these 5 people here. In the center of this really large and diverse team, we have people that really like communicating across spaces and integrating teams. And on the outside, we found teams that team members that are happier just being in one space, just being a team player or just lending their methods expertise. So we looked at this group at time 1, 2017, when they started, and then we looked at them again in 2020. So here's the whole graphic, and you can see how they're coded based on those different types of places. So you can see this whole peripheral ring are people that are lending kind of 1 or 2 skills and expertise. And the important thing here, when we talk about team science and that we need people that are integrators and translators and people who cross space, we don't need every member of a scientific team to be doing that. In fact, the bigger our teams are, and if we're doing data intensive science and we're doing modeling, we actually need some people that are just visualization, kind of gurus. We also need people that are really good at merging data from lots of different fields. We need people that do kind of like to innovate the processes of how we engage with each other and how we do science. So the take home on this is really that there are now more roles for scientists to play, and there's room for everyone. There's room for people who want to play only 1 or 2 roles, and there's room for people who really like to do several different types of things that are skilled communicators and systems thinkers and boundary crossers. So there's room for all of those people on our large science teams. So here's just a quick snapshot of this team from one time to the next. And to answer Tanya's question, the tie that is being represented in this graphic is learning. I learned from. So who are you learning from in this network? Of course, we have all the other ties too of their collaboration and expressive and instrumental ties, but we just mapped here the learning ties. So what we found is that we have these hidden networks. We have the official collaboration network. A lot of team science started by publishing and learning about what can we learn by looking at co-publication networks. But what lies underneath those co-publication networks are these other networks. Who are you learning from? Who is being mentored? Who are you mentoring? And who is having fun together? So teams that have fun together are the ones that stick together and grow and attract new people. And last, mentoring ties are super important, but they don't follow the same pattern that we might expect in other networks, like in the publication network. So here's an article that we published in, 2019 or 2020. I guess it came out in 2021, looking at following a team over time. And we really looked at changes in their mentoring degrees and in their publication and other kinds of efforts, and looking across their career stage at the different roles that people play over time. When we think about the literature on team science that says, what does science tell us about how we work together better? We have found that there are really 3 things, and this goes back to the article we talked about a minute ago. There are competencies for individuals and competencies for teams, and competencies, things we need organizations to do. Which one of these things do you think is the most trainable and easiest to tackle? Training for individuals, teams, or organizations? You can put a response in the chat. You can raise your hand. Yeah, Tanya and Lenore say individuals. That's absolutely right. Training individuals is the easiest. Getting organizations to change is the hardest. However, I'm finding more and more that individuals are struggling because their organizations haven't adapted to team science yet, either in their support and reward structures, in the way the organization is organized, or in the ways that we make it easy for people to work together. And that's a real difference between academia and industry. Industry understands how teams work and support it. Academia was never organized around team science. And so there are real strains that people feel. And it's one of the things that we work on when we work with teams, is helping them overcome those struggles with teams. Lenore.
Well, I was just sort of thinking about that part of the issue with academia and team science is also the sort of professional awards tend to be directed towards the individual. So there's a structural problem where you have to be able to recognize for like tenure and promotion group activities versus individual, I think.
Yeah. Yes, Lenore, there are a lot of structural problems at universities. One of them is that reward system for tenure and promotion. But there are other structural problems too, like a lot of the really important work being done is being done by people who are not full tenured professors or PhDs. I just worked with a team that had funding from our vice president for research office, and they were struggling and growing, and I was kind of walking through what is going on with their team. And I was looking at what's causing them stress, and there are all these Post-its on the board that looked like just like doing science. And I was like, what? I don't know what to make of this cluster of things that look to me like doing science. Why is doing science stressing you out? And it turned out that it was these 3 assistant professors who said, I do not have time to be doing this, but none of my grad students in my lab can do this piece that connects to the other lab. And we had 3 different people saying the same thing. And so at the end of that meeting, what we figured out is that they needed a postdoc. A grad student didn't really have the expertise or the level of understanding that was needed. And it didn't fit in the time constraints for professors to do, even though they might have the integrative knowledge and capacity. So they needed an integrator, and that was a postdoc. And they needed a postdoc that crossed 3 labs. So how does that fit with organizational structures? So that's one of the systemic barriers, is how we hire and support research scientists that are necessary for working on these complex projects that cross over spaces and integrate different types of science together. What other questions do you have right now?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you say that I was impressed by one of the plots that you had before, like that be a scientist also require a lot of other skills that we are not trained for, like project management, or like also science communication, also like interacting with people that have a different background. As you say, that there are some words that we use that have different meaning. So these skills, they are not really related directly. So you are talking about training in team science, but do you think that also training during graduate schools or regarding project management can also help into that? Because I think like an assistant professor or like also in a private company, you still need like to manage a lot of people, and sometimes you don't know how to do it because you don't know, like you don't have that specific skills, and you build that on your own. So do you think like academia should also invest into that? Like,
yes, and we're starting to see that. So the NIH has these big institute awards called Clinical and Translational Science Awards, CTSAs. And that's the one I've been leading their team science core. And so we built a set of team science workshops for early career folks that focus on the kind of teaming skills and the science communication and those kinds of things. We've also built another set of workshops for scientific leaders. Now we're usually doing those as part of people's big funded initiatives, but absolutely academia should be doing that. And that's one of the spaces that academics really suffer from, is that our institutions don't provide that kind of ongoing professional development that we need. That's very common in other places. So there's a big gap for training team science leaders in academia, and there's a lot of opportunity there to be providing professional development opportunities kind of across the life stages of academic researchers.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if I told you a little bit about what's going on in the field of team science, and then what have we been doing to try to expand the field and to support teams. So where are things going? If we look at this publication that came out just a few years ago, and we look at the themes of what's going on in team science, this big orange bar we see at the top is team science training. So that's one of the top ones that Anna Rita just had a question about. Evaluation assessment, which is one of the things that we've been doing, leadership and communication. So those are the top 4 themes. And you can see from the kind of publication and conversation where that was before to where it is now, you can see that those are really going. So training and assessment are the biggest ones, followed by leadership and communication. We also see that there's a real need to educate across departments. Scientists and researchers are increasingly requiring specialized training, but not within their field, across their field. So this picture kind of has nothing to do with education. It's not an article about education, but it is a team science publication that shows how scientists across fields are connecting with each other. And so I just wanted to, help you realize that as we work with people across different topics, we also need some of their theoretical knowledge and or also kind of methodological skills. And that doesn't look like the best training is like a semester-long graduate course. It might be a kind of 5-week module or a 1-credit course or a summer session. And so we're seeing increased needs from people for all kinds of things that help cross and connect different fields. We're also really finding that scientists struggle constantly with cross-institutional functionality for collaboration. Now, all these tools exist: Zoom, Slack, GoToMeeting, Trello, Basecamp, all these things, they're out there and you're all probably using them. You probably all have a Box account and a Dropbox account and Google Docs. But I stuck a big Band-Aid on top of this because all of these are actually Band-Aids. None of them, Basecamp is probably the closest that's less of a Band-Aid, have been created for companies with the assumption that we're all working inside a single institution. We can adopt a program that we're all using, we all have universal access to. This is not true when we're working with our friends in federal agencies, across institutions. We're working with students who are going to come and work on our project for a little bit, and then they're going to leave. The membership and the cost of these, the annual subscription rates and controlling who has access and giving people access and really being able to share and being able to store our knowledge over time and to be able to have good interaction. Every scientific team struggles with what communication tools they're going to use and which ones are going to meet their need. And that's because we really haven't designed any of these tools, including Zoom, to really meet the needs of the users. So this is a kind of constant struggle. And if I was an entrepreneur, this is what I would be doing, is making new collaboration software for scientists, but I'm not. The agencies across the globe that are funding scientists are really asking for us to be focused on problem-solving science. So what is that? What does problem-solving science look like that's different from discovery science? One of the things that we're going to do problem-solving science is that we actually need to begin with what the user's questions are and think about all of the outputs of our science as being easily translatable, usable, tools that answer people's questions, but it means we have to know what the questions are to start from in order to create data and visualizations that are interactive, that are flexible, that are emergent, and that are designed to answer questions. So I just like this graphic about thinking about data visualization and data assessments, that this comes from a company, not from a scientist, but I just liked the kind of components that are here. We also realize that the social sciences have been dramatically underinvested in. This article published by Overland and Sovacool in 2018 is about how climate mitigation science has been underinvesting in the social sciences. And when we think about how do we solve these problems that society has created with our laws, our patterns of interaction, our technology, how we organize ourselves, the social sciences are foundational and necessary to solving them. More measurements of the physical sciences are not going to help us find solutions. They help us understand the problem better. They help us discover the processes through which the climate is changing. But the solutions to climate change must begin in the social sciences. And until we start a really serious investment in the social sciences and in the processes and theories of social change, we are not going to be able to solve the problems that scientists are being asked to solve. And strangely, this is a highly controversial statement. These two scientists, when they published this article, began getting hate mail from natural scientists and physical scientists because they dared to say that we need to invest in other kinds of science if we're going to really take seriously solutions to climate issues. So where do we go? The new metrics for teams and for universities and funders really need to think about combining data types. They need to be interactive. We need them to predict team performance and to do it early, kind of early detection about when teams are not going well, and to help us actually assess what is convergence and how do we know it when it's happening. So those are kind of the open questions that people are asking for and looking for in metrics and tools. Now, I don't know what your name is, S Dash has said in the chat, we need tools that reveal these team issues. Can you recommend visualization tools that are less time consuming for team leaders and particularly for small teams? So we're working on an interactive data set that could be adopted and used by a university that all kinds of teams could have access to. And I'll recommend some in a minute. So this one we've been building, this is data from the CU Anschutz campus, the medical campus, and we have put in publication data, but we're also talking about adding the kind of network data that I talked about, as well as grant writing data, so that we all have a better ability to detect what's happening on teams and where our efforts have been productive and what the opportunity is. And so this one automatically, the tool itself is designed to visualize the network for you. So you don't have to know how to visualize networks. The tool itself has it in there. You just select who you want to see. So in this first one, you can see a department in the visualization of the whole network. And then up in the upper right-hand corner, it revisualizes that centered around just the department. It takes all the other data out. And then in the bottom, we visualize the network around a single person. Say if you were looking at someone's TNP profile and you wanted to see what has this person been doing here. So people are definitely working on these. This is built on an R Shiny app, which you all probably know is, another just kind of like open science tool that people can use. And so when people build tools like this on open platforms, other people can take them, adjust them, adopt them for their own purposes. So one of the things that you can do with this that you saw we did, when we did custom analyses, we looked at them over time. So here is a network visualization centered on the same person over time, but looking at 3 different time periods so that we can see how their network has changed. And the purple lines here in this document are theses, and the blue ones are other publications. So now you can really see what contribution this person has made to graduate education in the program, and who are the other scientists that they are collaborating with. So this is really where kind of data visualization is moving into creating apps that answer people's questions, like the question that S- has asked, right? How can team leaders see how their team is doing? And then here's a comparative analysis where we're looking at 2 programs and looking at how integrated those programs are. So this is a different kind of question, a question that administrators, might be curious and interested about. So these are the things that we're working on, are building these kinds of new tools that make it easy for people to see what's happening in their network and to ask questions that even the researchers who built this tool might not have thought about. So to answer the question about what tools, there are a lot of tools that visualize networks. There is one that's called Sum App. The app is called Greater Than the Sum. If you just Google Sum App, you can find that one. This might be a tool that you're interested in. It's mostly designed for community engagement and public health stuff, so it probably isn't the best tool for visualizing team science and team engagement. There is a network visualization tool called Vizone that is a free tool and is pretty quick and easy to learn. Gephi is a social network analysis tool that I think puts out really attractive things, but it takes a little bit more time to learn and understand that. And then Kumu is an app that you might all be familiar with it kind of handles the visualization for you and has certain things designed, and it has plugins that other things kind of might generate the data, and then it kind of pipes the data over to Kumu, and then Kumu visualizes it, and then you can put that Kumu visualization on your website or other places. So those are a few things that we see people using for visualization.
Jenny, I take it that was your last slide.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And please, my friends and colleagues, start asking some questions. We have Monica. Go ahead, Monica.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Appreciate it. This was a really helpful and interesting talk. So I appreciate John inviting you, Jenny, and you giving the presentation. So kudos. Lenore mentioned earlier that for AgBio data, we have a larger network of the entire AgBio data community itself, but within that scope, we have a grant from the National Science Foundation to sort of do a working group of sprints, I guess. So for a year, we have smaller groups that select a particular topic that we think has a potential for success for us finding a solution to it in 6 to 12 months. And so it's 6 to 10 people in a working group trying to produce a product. And so what I learned here is that was probably a bad idea because teams take time. But we're kind of that's where we are right now. And we have new working groups starting in January. So what I was trying to think about was practical applications of what you're saying, because we have observed sort of that some of the things you mentioned about teams breaking apart due to not feeling connected, that kind of thing. We've observed that in our first year. So one thing I was thinking of is, okay, we could probably assess based on the metrics that you were showing earlier, and just have anonymous surveys saying, hey, how connected do you feel? How important is this group to you? If we did that, and a group would show sort of on the bad scale, as you were showing those comparisons between effective teams and less effective teams, what do we do besides? So your answer was spend more time together, but we also saw that it's hard for busy people to spend a lot of time together. So we can do that, but are there other ways for us to sort of intervene and help a team move forward if that sort of break apart occurs?
Yeah. So the first thing is to support teams to form right to begin with, so they don't end up breaking apart. One of the things I wanted to just say is that putting people together in smaller teams helps, right? If you're trying to build a whole big team with 30 people, that's harder to do and kind of lift off. If people are working in kind of small teams of 5 to 7 or kind of 6 to 12, it's a little easier for those to spin up a little bit faster. Then when we think about spending time, some of them are really just how we structure our time together, so that when we have meetings, we always structure some time for people to check in and build trust. So the beginning of your meeting agenda should always begin with a check-in, and that lets people say, you know, how they're doing, what they're struggling with, or whatever. That allows for expressions of empathy and support. People might connect you to some other resource in the community. Some scientists have a very low tolerance for this because they're like, we need to get to business, we're busy. But building trust is the business of a team. And so understanding that teamwork is as important as task work. We often waste time in meetings giving updates that could be written down and handled asynchronously. And they could just be at the bottom of the agenda. People contribute to that asynchronously beforehand. They're then in the document that anybody who misses can be there. So swap that 10 minutes of announcements and updates and instead put in 10 minutes of human connection.
Thanks.
Anna Rita.
That's really useful. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. It was very, very interesting. So actually, I have two questions. One probably is related with what Monica was asking. So based on your, the first one is like, based on your experience, what are the signs that a team is not working properly? So are there, like, if I'm the program coordinator at Biodata, and of course I also I'm trying to manage different working groups. So is there a sign that can give us an alarm saying, hey, this is not working good, and so it's time that you do something? So we have seen—
You all know the signs when teams are not working good, because the clear sign is that it doesn't feel good. You don't want to go to the meetings, they're frustrating, and people are exhausted or annoyed with each other. So that team sentiment is the clearest sign. The hard part is not the sign detecting whether a team is doing good or going off the rails. You all know when a team's going off the rails. The hard part is understanding what's going wrong on that team so that you can provide the right intervention. And that does take some experience and expertise. And you either need to ask people and do a series of interviews, ask them what's going on and what the issue is, or you need to bring someone in who's a really good facilitator for that.
And the second question that I have is so I see that you, at some point, you also consider gender diversity within a team. My question is that if you ever also consider diversity at other level, like cultural, or how that kind of how is the effect, inclusivity in the team, how much?
There's a lot to measure and think about there and consider there. So we do a whole workshop just on diversity of teams, and there are 6 or 8 or 10 different types of diversity, depending on how you want to bucket them and think about them. So diversity is really important. Gender is just one we visualized here. So that's something I could spend hours talking about. So I think today I'll just say, yes, we do measure it in all of its complexity. Is something really to think about for teams, and it's something to be specifically developed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kelly? Go ahead and
Kelly,
unmute yourself, Kelly.
muted.
Thank you, John. Fascinating presentation. I mean, just really quite interesting. I've been involved in sort of in a peripheral from the team science community for about 15 years. But I think you really put it together very nicely for where we're trying to go in agriculture. And I think that's really important. So I deal with a lot of international teams and multidisciplinary at the same time. And we're really trying to go from basic all the way to translational science. And I don't control funding for all of these different people, nor do I control how the reward system works for any of them. Some teams, I think, as you know, come together very good. We're great with getting up through the vision. We all agree this is the vision, but then how do you implement the moment someone sees they could get be the PI on a big project, then they're off on their own. You know, they immediately leave. And yes, they end up with a great publication in science, but then our vision and everything else suffers and we have these setbacks. So is there something specific that you would recommend in terms of both international, multidisciplinary, multicultural, as Anna-Rita brought up as well, because even the same, I mean, obviously we're speaking different languages, we have words mean things differently, and then you add that to the disciplines where the same word means different things in the same communities. What do you recommend in that regard?
I'm not quite sure what the question is. Like, how do we recommend to help those complex teams?
Well, how does it,
together?
well, it's really, how do you get out of, because what your presentation was really kind of focused on a smaller team. And I'm thinking working within like the university. So you've got people going to different departments and multidisciplinary. But in many cases, the projects that I'm working with, we're trying to find people internationally to bring in. So are there ways, and are you aware of evidence-based basis that could actually help us in terms of building teams internationally?
So the same things all apply. I showed you the graphics from smaller kind of local teams, just because those are the ones I kind of have kept. We're working with big international teams too, and it's the same thing. People need that time to be together. Face-to-face interaction really helps. I know if we care about climate, we're all a little kind of shy to like fly a bunch of people around the world to connect. But those large teams, international teams, geographically dispersed teams, they need more effort and more coordinating efforts that are focused on building the team. And that's one of the things like we tend to neglect and give them less. The bigger and the more dispersed they are, the less supports we give them, but they just need many more supports. And so all of the same tools in that one slide on developmental evaluation, that what we're doing with teams is providing coaching and training and intervention and assessment. I think that it's actually those three things together, doing all of them, that is what really helps coalesce and advance teams.
And do you see within how you build that in, do you build it into your project management plan? That is part of your project management, and you just say you're going to offer these kinds of training courses? Is that how you get it funded? Yeah,
and we build it into the funding thing. So that picture that you saw, Groundswell is a team that's funded. It's a 5-year funded team by the UK PRP. And so we have just built in funding for us to do executive coaching for leadership, to do trainings for the whole consortium, to facilitate those large meetings. So when you bring the whole institute or coalition together, you should have it facilitated by a third-party facilitator, not by a scientist. Scientists don't know how to facilitate teams in ways that advance science and teaming. And so so I would bake that into the funding proposals, getting a team science person on those big projects.
Great, thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Lenore, and again, if you want to stay on and talk, stay on and talk.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, great presentation. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jenny. This is really wonderful. So in the interest of respecting people's time, my questions are really get back to the issue of sort of the virtual kind of team building, and maybe, you know, sort of picking your brain about any kinds of suggestions or recommendations for how we can build trust in that space. Like I'm immediately thinking, you know, because we had to do all of this collaboration and team building, you know, when we couldn't actually be together. So I would sort of take those recommendations offline, I guess. I know that you said that a lot of the software that we're currently using isn't really great, but if there are suggestions or resources that you could point us to more effectively utilize those resources, that would be great, because we are, you know, we are a group of people who meet across many time zones. We're not all in one place. We will have an opportunity for some of us to meet in person. But anyway, so it's really more like if there's a follow-up to like, here are some things you can do, here's some suggestions that we have, I'd really appreciate that, so that we could try to implement some of those.
Yeah, so a couple quick things are, you do have to use some kind of online platform. So if people are in different places, that asynchronous communication really matters. So Slack, might be the right thing. But one of the interventions that we do with teams, we have a guide for it, is facilitating that conversation about what's the communication platform that is going to meet the team's need. And doing that, instead of just one person saying we're using this and that's how it's going to be, actually facilitating the conversation about what are our communication needs, what's the smallest set of tools that we can use that will help us accomplish those, is in itself a team building activity because it helps people coalesce and think together. But then the product is something that you have more buy-in for. So there's a whole kind of variety and series of things. There's not one thing. There's like building a team charter. There's having this team communication, kind of communication session where you all think about that. If you're all in different places and don't get to meet together, you do want to do some team science trainings that are virtual and are designed to meet the specific needs. When I work on grant proposals, getting back to Kelly's question, I just put in a certain number of team science workshops each year, and I sometimes get pushback, and some PIs are like, well, I don't think we need them. And I'm like, just trust me. You need 3 every year, and we'll decide as we get there. It will be emergent. What does the team most need? The more I do these trainings with people, the more people are like, oh my gosh, Jenny, can you repeat the running effective meetings one for us? Because I feel like I need a repeat on that. And scientists are busy, they're tired, they're exhausted, they're overcommitted. So if the team science stuff, how do we work together better, is someone else's responsibility and I bring it, then all those exhausted PIs can just show up in the room and be there to participate and learn. So we find that putting trainings, consulting, and those other activities in the proposal and in the project plan is as important as the regular meeting schedule.
Yeah, so thanks. I raised my own hand to be protocol sufficient. I just want to make a couple of comments here and then open it back up for other people. As I said, I've been involved in a number of different team projects and lived through this the hard way. And that's what really struck a chord the first time I heard Jenny's talk, because it just became so obvious. It's just, okay, yep, that makes perfect sense. So a couple of things that I've talked to the steering committee before, but all of you, the time is right. I don't think the time has ever been better right now, even recognizing all the wacky things that are going on in the world. As I said, tomorrow at noon Eastern time, the Academy will be releasing their study on enhancing collaboration between land-grant universities, specifically for this kind of thing. How do we change the structures of land-grant universities and university research so that we can focus on these bigger issues? So I would really encourage you, and I've done this with so many groups. People say, well, I can't be political. Okay, don't use your university email other than on, approved upon guidelines, but you are a citizen and you can support these things. NIFA just had a listening session. We have people now at NIFA who want to do these things. They're listening to people. And so the story there is, outside of ag bio data management, the opportunity to get these things done is here. And so I would encourage you to raise your voice. Other questions from the audience for Jenny?
I'm sorry, John. I think we need to cut because the Zoom account is also used by a working group. So they are...
okay. There you go. All
thank
right.
You
well,
so
thank
much,
you, Jenny.
for...
Thank you, Anna-Rita.
Thank
Bye
you so
now.
much all for joining, and hope to see you next month. Thank you again, Jenny, for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.